So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and today this is a map I think we have seen once before. There is also a variant of this one which is in Silmarillion, I believe. It definitely has some of the same architecture, but this is EREGION. Now don't be too concerned that there's no one actually within the settlements at the moment. Because of some slightly peculiar deployment zones, the defenders are currently way over there, a collection of the various elven factions in the game who are going to be defending home turf today. Of course, EREGION being something of a memory of the NOLDOR, which is what we're going to be seeing here today. A decently defensible settlement as well. I think actually the gates on this occasion are red herrings. I think you can just pass through them, but they do act as choke points. So for all intents and purposes, really, all it removes is the necessity of killing them off with the ram. I believe as well there is supposed to be water all around it. You can only get to the settlement by going across the various bridges, but again, the bridges themselves I don't think are going to actually be too much of a part of this battle anyway. It's going to be entirely based around the settlement itself and a decent little defensive position here at the back that the elves can fall back to. But we'll go through the attacking armies first of all, a collection of various evil factions, and of course they are going to have a significant numbers advantage. It is a 5v3. The elves will have a lot of quality and they're going to need to lean on that very heavily if they are to manage to stave off their opposition here. We have a Google Bobble who's going to be playing as Mordor, of course a very welcome sight for any attacking force because of the combination of numbers and quality that they are able to bring to bear, as well as some interesting unique tools that they can also utilise as well. The Olakai, not unique, but perhaps the strongest of their various unit, of the various monstrous infantry outside of something like the Ents. Very effective in this sort of situation because even really high quality regular infantry are going to take losses when facing off against them. Their mass can help smash defensive lines to bits, and if you time it right, trolls can be utterly devastating, but they will need to be careful because they will be facing off against some pretty scary units on this occasion. Temple Guard, if they can train their steel bows onto the right targets, the armor piercing damage will be very effective against even some of the strongest elven units. There are also no slouches in melee either, albeit they will find themselves outclassed at the very high end in this particular engagement. But still, it is going to be interesting to see whether or not they can get their damage to be done at range. We saw in the last battle at Helm's Deep the attackers were not able to do that, and it ended up costing them the battle, so Temple Guard will be hoping to do that. Uruk Chieftains have got some armor piercing. In terms of their baseline stats, they do lag a little bit behind other bodyguard units, but they're pretty efficient for what they are. Is efficiency going to be enough against the level of quality they're going to be facing off against today? I do not know. We've got the Orc Fodder in here as well with some Morgul Chosen. Can't actually see. There we are, Morgul Chosen and the Orc Fodder here as well. So a combination of spears, one significantly stronger than the other, but one significantly cheaper than the other. So going for the numbers and the more defensive edge as well. The core of the army going to be a little bit more resilient. The Uruk Halberds, Mordor's only option for a polearm unit, but it's understandable why they're here. If they do get themselves situated, is one of the ways in which you can hold a little bit of that elven quality at long range, and there are quite a lot of them as well. And a mainstay among attacking factions are going to be cheap javelins if you have them, and the Orc Javelins are probably the best example of this kind of unit in the game. Very easily able to gain a good amount of value for what they cost, and difficult to deal with in various ways. They are even spears in melee, so while cavalry will flatten them off the charge, it's not completely without risk to those kinds of units. The Nazgul, who we've seen several times in the past be those silent killers at the centre of an orcish horde, very, very effective, and of course the one unit which is undeniably stronger in terms of stats than even the elven units they're facing off against, but there are only 10 of them, so you do have to bear that in mind. And the Troll Drummers to help keep some of these more lowly orcs pointing in the right direction. We have Rhun, who's going to be playing as another Mordor army as well. We've got the Olakai, who are going to be, again, a second unit of them. Troll Drummers, I mean the Troll Drummers can also be that mass pushing kind of unit, but they are significantly weaker than the Olakai. You only pay 300 gold for them after all, and you get what you pay for in a melee sense in terms of their effectiveness. Morgul Chosen back there as well. Melkor's Abominations, it's understandable why the attackers have decided to go for some high-end anti-cavalry cavalry, because sallying out has been effective. We saw in the last battle how effective lance cavalry can be for the defenders. So having this kind of unit does reduce the risk of that. The Caragors are going to be a real problem for even some of the stronger elven cavalry units. And then we have the Blackguard of Barad-dûr when it comes to trying to force their way through, force the issue. in the settlement itself to try and get through the streets with a little bit more haste. The trolls are one way of doing that. The other main way that Mordor have to do that are the Great Shield Infantry unit, the Blackguard of Barad-dûr, the most numerous Great Shield Infantry unit that the game has to offer, but also the weakest in terms of their melee stats. They're not defenseless in this regard by any means. They're perfectly serviceable against rank and file units, but they're unlikely to be in that kind of engagement when you consider the quality that the elves can bring to bear, so they are going to be all about that mass pushing capability that they have. The Orc Maulers are really going to struggle in terms of their defensive stats, especially without the armour upgrade against most of the elven units, but that armour piercing, if they do work in conjunction with some other units, could be effective against the likes of Imladris, but it's going to be mostly its warm bodies on the front line with a little bit more of an attacking edge. They will really struggle against those elven swordsmen. We've got some more orc fodder as well, and he's decided to go for more Uruk infantry than anything else, which does pad out those numbers a little bit. In a 5v3, if you do go for a numbers heavy focus, that can be a winning strategy for the most part. So yeah, several units of them. Orc javelins in behind as well, understandable why they are here. Same reason as the previous Mordor army, and then some more Nazgul as well. Now then, on the other side of what would be a body of water and a land bridge crossing, we have another Mordor army, Commander Alvaratus? Going to be a rather similar army, I'd imagine. Again, orc fodder and javelins for the numbers and the efficiency. Going for a few more regular archers as well. It's interesting how all of the Mordor armies we've seen so far have decided to prioritise different regular Uruks. First one with the halberd, second one with the infantry, and Commander here going for a few more Uruk archers, so it will allow you to trade fire. Of course, the elves are always going to have the edge over the orcs when it comes to pure damage and for the most part skirmishing as well. But just occupying a few of those skirmishes does have its own benefits. Several units of Uruk infantry as well, with some Morgul chosen on both flanks. Just in behind we can see that these Orc Maulers do have the armour upgrade. They're still going to be weak in the same kind of ways, but just that little bit extra survivability up close and personal to try and keep themselves alive against the elves. Uruk halberd, so definitely more of a rank and file army this, but going for those numbers, like I said, in a 5v3, if at least a couple of your armies do it, it is definitely worthwhile in my opinion. A couple of units of the Blackguard for that mass pushing capability once again, and some Uruk chieftains, and the Temple Executioners as well with the armour upgrade, which this is a unit which will be able to go toe to toe with many of the higher tier elven units. Maybe not beat them, but definitely get closer than most. Then over here we have Lobot, who's going to be playing as a runic army, which Rhun brings some different strengths to the table. Carmel's Immortals, actually, as far as an entry-level unit goes, they could be fairly efficient against the elves, at least against the entry-level elven units. They might bite off more than they can chew if they go after the higher tier ones, but still reasonably numerous. They will suffer under arrow fire, though, because of the lack of a shield, which is where the standard line infantry units will come in. The flag rim, of course, ever the heart and soul of a runic army, a good, reasonably heavy unit of line infantry with that armour piercing from the maces and axes that they wield. Having said that, will that be enough against elven factions? It really does depend. They'll be better against Imladris, half decent against Lothlorien, not so great against Mirkwood or Lindon. Lindon, of course, a pretty poor matchup for them, so we'll see which elven factions are actually on the defence. Scion Rim, very defensible kind of unit. Again, they'll struggle to deal damage against the elves, but they will keep themselves alive longer than most of the other Easterling units that are on the field, and several units of Gamprim as well, useful for the same reason as the Uruk halberds. You may not have access to a pike unit for that long range capability in melee, but it's long enough to be to the point where you can still dictate engagements if the enemy don't have a good answer to it. So the Gamprim really an obvious bring in most situations for Rhun. The skirmishers, we've got Balkoth tribesmen, so again some regular javelins. We've got some Narim for that longer range damage, slightly more damaging as well than the Uruk archers, but nowhere near as damaging as the Dragon's Wrath crossbows, who could be utterly devastating if they get used in the right way. However, we have seen the difficulties of using crossbows on the attack in the last battle, so again we'll see if these guys can do a little bit better. We've got some more Carmel's Immortals, Scion Rim and Flag Rim, and also some fast movers, again some good mounted skirmishers, some Golden Raiders, which will be good at dealing with any sort of sally outs as long as they move with something like the Abominations to give them a little bit of cover. But they can also be useful later on in the battle as well, and the slightly higher angle of fire they have from horseback makes them a little bit more user-friendly to use if they get bogged down in choke point fighting in the settlements, but we'll wait and see. There are also fewer of them, and they will get ripped apart by elven skirmishers, of course. And the 5th attacking army, another Mordor force commanded by Revios. Nazgul are here once again. I'd imagine things are quite similar. Troll drummers to keep the rank and file in line. Several units of Uruk infantry, some more Uruk halberds as well, some Uruk chieftains, Temple execution, so some expensive units here. We've got some orc fodder as well. Looks like a slightly more high tier army this. Most of the bodyguard units, if not all of them in fact, are present here. It's a big investment, especially when you consider the Melkor's abominations over here as well. And depends on, I'm not sure how useful the beasts of Gorgoroth are going to be in this sort of battle. I mean, if they can get in and amongst the settlement and start causing chaos alongside the trolls and alongside the Blackguard of Barad-dûr, for example, things could get too chaotic for the elves. But if they do get shut down early, it's more difficult to control this kind of unit in a settlement when they start running all over the place and getting separated from one another. But yeah, an expensive army this from Revio, still not without numbers, but going for more of those bodyguard units, which is fine. You know, there's a good mix of the focuses here from the Mordor armies, I would suggest. Now then, the defenders, we have Lindon, played by Colonel Speaks 46, the Dwarves of Khazad-Dum joining their elven, I was going to say brethren, but not really, like, you know, the elder races fighting side by side. I mean, Khazad-Dum very powerful, of course, Ricky Beagle, and then Imladris as well from the Flame of Arnold. So starting off with Lindon, I mean, it's going to be quite difficult to see what units are in here. We can kind of guess at what some of these units are. I mean, considering the budget that these guys have got access to, Lindon, good javelins, good pikes as well, which means the halberds are going to struggle to get situated if the Mithlon pikemen can really hold down those choke points. Really strong in terms of their melee capabilities as well with those Noldoran units, and of course the heavy swordsmen, and just in general Lindon, when it comes to that melee defense, are going to be really effective. Obviously we know that they're going to be good against Rhun, but also against the entry level Uruks they're going to be very, very efficient. It's really only going to be the higher tier units from the likes of Mordor and perhaps the longer range skirmishers from Rhun which could be used to good effect against them, but even then, Lindon should have the answers if they're wielded correctly by Colonel Speaks here. Some cavalry units as well, the Horse Lords of Ulmo. Very potent, interesting fight between them and the Melkor's abominations, but we'll see how well they can be utilised as they sally forth. Khazad-Dum, a little bit easier to see what they've got. 3rd Legion infantry with the upgrades. Here, of course, 4th Legion, definitely a very heavy-duty faction this, and probably will make up a little bit for the lack of elven mass. It's going to be a little bit more difficult for units like the Blackguard to have it all their own way if the dwarves really get dug in. And they've also got stuff like the Reclaimers and the mounted crossbows as well for some real damage at mid to short range. 2nd Legion Axeguard, plenty of armor piercing from Khazad-Dum as well, which will be useful, especially against Mordor in this particular matchup, because most of their defense comes from their armor, such as it is. Meteor Guard, one of the strongest, if not the strongest unit of line infantry that the game has to offer. Hammers of Gundabad with extra damage as well. There's less of them than the 2nd Legion, but they are locked morale, although if Khazad-Dum are fleeing in a situation like this, it's a sign things have gone awry. Guards of Khazad-Dum, very powerful as well, more attack-minded than the Meteor Guard, but I mean, they're hardly flimsy in melee, but they aren't as survivable as the Meteor Guard. Arguably the strongest unit of pikes the game has to offer, the 1st Legion pikes, very, very powerful, also with armor piercing. If they get dug in, it's going to be difficult to get rid of them. Sons of the Fallen as well, and that's pretty much what we can see. I mean, the Iron Watcher in here as well. You can see some of them. I mean, they're a very powerful skirmisher unit. Only really the Witchers are capable of turning a battle around quicker than they are at long range, and if they get dug in here, they should be in a good place. Mercenary crossbows as well can sally out. And finally, ever the fan favourites, Imladris, played by the Flame of Arnold. Interesting to see the Imladris Guardians without their armour upgrade. They don't necessarily need it, of course. They're still heavily armoured among the Elven forces, and they're very, very good in melee. A little bit more finesse than Khazad-Dum. Less armour piercing, but more base damage is kind of the way things go. Khazad-Dum, I think, have got, at the highest level, stronger armour than Imladris, but Imladris, of course, have got better melee defense, so it's all about what you want to prioritise. Both are pretty much the two defensive powerhouses of the game. In many ways, you could say that Lindon, in a very specific way, and also Ered can join them in that regard. Imladris sentries, so more very high tier pikes, those halberds from the attackers, going to struggle to get through all of these long range weapons that the defenders have. Swords of Rivendell, obviously the Eldarenway Swordmaster is going to be very, very good against most of the opposition they face here today. It's only really the high-end armour piercing of Rhun that could be considered efficient against them, but even then, in those matchups, the Eldarenway are going to be really, really powerful. Imladris Guardians, plenty of the Spears of Rivendell as well, Noritin, Warriors. Not neglecting the numbers here in Imladris, they've gone for the full lineup, and that is going to be necessary considering the sheer amount of numbers they're facing off against today. Elder Spearmen are more defensive unit, of course, which they will need in the long run. They're going to need that staying power. Speaking of which, few units have got as much staying power as the Gwythi Arthand. Probably the most survivable unit of heavy spears the game has to offer when you consider everything involved. Gwythi Rockdor, they could move with the Horse Lords of Ulmo and the mounted crossbows, so as far as a mounted force goes, the defenders definitely have the edge, and we saw how effective that can be in the last battle, but it could also be a massive money sink if the attackers can deal with them efficiently. More Elder archers as well for some good long-range skirmishing. The Gwythi Myrdain, a fantastic unit of armour-piercing infantry this, maybe not as survivable all-round as something like the Mithril Guard, but that extra potency in attack, and also they're a dual-wielding unit, so at least in terms of their melee defense they do have a little bit of an edge there. And then also the upgraded God Helene, which do come with those Silverthorn arrows, and also are very, very tanky in melee as well. So Imladris, as you may expect, especially alongside Khazad-Dum, and in their own way Lindon, are pretty ideally placed for outlasting the enemy if they can choose their defensive position within the settlement appropriately. But I think there is going to be a fairly lengthy cut here as the defenders move across here and get into defensive shape, but this is going to be a long one anyway at 54,000 frames. So I'll make a cut and we'll rejoin when the defenders are situated and the attackers are about to march on this city of old. A fairly lengthy entry phase to the battle there, as everyone had to move around, but Imladris are now opening up on the forces of Mordor as they move over here. And while the water may not be here, and actually if you do listen closely you can actually still hear the water sound effects, so the game still thinks it's there even if the visual effects are not. And that does mean, of course, that you can't go across the dried out riverbed as we see it. They do still have to use the bridges, and I was wrong. The defenders are going to defend the bridges first and foremost, which I think if each of the armies could split up 1 for 1 on each of the bridges I would be more in favour of that, but because there's 4 of them they might find themselves a little bit stretched over the long haul, so they will need to pick the right moment to retreat back into EREGION proper. Plenty of these archers, however, which will be firing, though not at the orc fodder that are leading the way. As we look a little bit further back, however, plenty of Uruk halberds, plenty of Morgul chosen. I mean, not wasting any time here is Google. Going to be moving forward with a large amount of forces, and I do think this is a pretty good move to test the elves' resolve, because if they aren't prepared to commit an awful lot of units to defend this bridge, it will have made all of this in vain. So we shall see. I mean, they are going to be sending forward some pikes. They do have good infantry. I mean, the problem Mordor might have are units routing off in short order if they end up getting shot in the side, and if they're going up against some very fine elven combatants as well. But the Imladris Guardians taking the brunt of the initial force, and then the pikes moving forward, and then we've also got some very defensively minded Elder Spearmen that can push their way forwards as well. So in terms of individual units, Imladris will be just fine. It's whether or not they can hold back this slew of orcs in the way that they would like. It is only the one Mordor army that's over here as well, so this is a bold move, because if this doesn't work for Mordor, Imladris could completely destroy one of the attacking armies fairly early, and they do need to do that, of course. They need to go about their business quickly in that regard to try and equalise the numbers count a little bit, but several units of elves crossfiring, and the fire arrows I think are actually a good idea on this occasion, because of the amount of damage they're going to be taking and the morale question marks that exist against the basic Mordor units in comparison to the elven ones. It's a shame the Olag High are at the back actually, because they would be just the thing to try and instill a bit of chaos into this elven line. Meanwhile, over here, slightly more by the books from Mordor, over on the front of this defence, trying to test the enemy's resolve with javelins first, but getting a little bit too close, and as a result the dwarves able to chase them off. 3rd Legion with their armour upgrades, very intimidating again, much like the Imladris Guardians, one of the strongest units of all-round line infantry that the game has to offer on an individual basis. Lindar Bowmen in support as well, so Khazad-Dum and Lindon mixing and matching on their defences a little bit, which is understandable. There are more bridges than defending armies. Sons of the Fallen again, Mordor doing the same thing over here. Slightly more akin to the Mordor advance over on the other side, albeit Rhun backing up the initial Mordor army gives them a little bit more margin for error here. Also, they're not going all in just yet. The Harlanded infantry will have a similar effect on the very lowliest of orcs as Imladris will be having over on the other side, and they too have pikes. So on an individual level, these units are not quite as sturdy as the Imladris ones defending the other bridge. but there are also more of them for Lindon. And again, the combination of Khazad-Dum and Lindon over here is also a couple of Imladris units, interestingly enough. So Imladris' full fury isn't over on the other side, but also moving forward. I mean, it is incumbent on the attackers to try and force their way across these bridges as quickly as they possibly can, because the longer they get stuck here, the worse it's going to be for them in the long run. You can see here, Mordor still standing and fighting. They haven't routed off in the face of the Elven Fury. The Olai-Kai now in here, and you can see the Olai-Kai's presence has had a positive impact for Mordor, but it's whether or not they have the ability to keep this going. Really. Still the flaming shot moving in. Of course, the Orc fodder will be routed off. They will come back, but this is going to be a real problem. They've made their bed now, Mordor, though, and now they have to lie in it. Swords of Rivendell joining the fray as well. Some Ardenheim shadow bows, drawing the attention of the god Helene. Javelins have still got some temple units back there as well. I do wonder the Nazgul were committed in here. Kind of hard to tell when there's so many units, especially with the Olai-Kai getting in the way. Not many of them have fallen yet. I mean, quite a few of these Elven units are more defensively minded, even the bodyguard unit they've got in here. Actually, no, they have both of their bodyguard units in here. The Gwaithir Myrdain will be pretty damn good against the Olai-Kai, very damaging. But everything else is a little bit more defensive. Even the Elven Swordsman, the defending stats are really the main thing. The Orcs sort of routing back towards the enemy lines, which will at least give Mordor the illusion of having more troops here once again. Or at Halberds routing. Could they have skirmished a little bit more? I mean, the Ardenheim Shadowbows are there. It's an unenviable task for Google, but maybe as the only force with only one army nearby to this bridge, he should have been a little bit more slow-paced with it, allowed his allies maybe to be more hyper-aggressive and then have a little delay before he engaged in this kind of tactic. Still, in a 5v3, the defenders do need all the breaks they can get, and Imladris will be very pleased with the fact that they've defanged one of the Mordor armies. Really, in the very early stages. I mean, we've only been watching for the past 4,000 frames. It is a very bloody engagement indeed. Meanwhile, over here, something a little bit more akin to that slow burn strategy. We've got the Uruk archers trying to fire into the 3rd Legion as they actually go on to a little bit of a counter-offensive. Looks like there's... Is this fodder, or is this going to be some more javelins that are caught in the crossfire? It rather depends on that, whether or not this is going to be worthwhile. I mean, of course, the 3rd Legion easily defeat Orc fodder, but any losses they sustain at the hands of the Mordor archers will be a tragedy. And the 3rd Legion also well equipped to deal with that sort of engagement anyway. Over here, still trying to play this game of cat and mouse with one another, which hasn't really resulted in too much just yet. I mean, plenty more Orcs are dead, but the Orcs can afford that sort of thing. Every one of these 3rd Legionnaires that have fallen will be very well appreciated, I'm sure, by the attackers. But Noldor Guard now adding themselves to the front line over here for Lindon. Solid enough unit. As soon as I say that, of course, they peel themselves off the front line. Carmel's Immortals here also. And the issue that the elves have here is that they're not able to set up the same crossfire that Imladris had on the other side, because they've actually pushed the attackers back, which in the long run may actually prove to be slightly better for them. Lindar bowmen firing across the way into the Ardenheim shadow bows. Neither side really targeting down the other's infantry. There's the occasional Orc arrow that's trying to go after what I would presume to be the Lindon pikes. They have now reorganised themselves a little bit closer to their archers, giving themselves a little bit more of a chance to set up that deadly crossfire. The Immortals will be happy that they're not taking too much in the way of arrow fire. This is exactly where they can be a little bit more efficient after all. Getting caught on the end of those pikes though, Noldor Guard moving forwards again. I mean, they may end up pushing the enemy back once more, but they can't afford to show their backs to the enemy for too long. They'll take too much damage. So it's not as if their archers are actually actively targeting the infantry anyway. They seem to be more interested in going after some of the units back here. I mean, the Ardenheim Shadowbows are a damaging unit for sure. A fair few of these units deemed not worthy of elven attention from range. Firing into these units as they cross the bridge, but certainly the Scion Rim will be pretty decent at dealing with those sorts of ranged attacks. Still, the quality of the elves in this sort of narrow engagement should mean they'll be okay for now, but it's whether or not the attackers come forward with something a bit heavier. I mean, the Beasts of Gorgoroth are there, of course, and then there's also the small matter of trolls throughout the battlefield as well. Speaking of which, Malachi is still standing tall, many of them. No warriors getting involved in melee now as well. Pulling out their dual weaponry, an axe and a dagger in some cases. Sentry is still acting as the backstop there. I mean, the problem that the Olek-hai are going to have ultimately is the fact they simply don't have enough support anymore. Still got some Mordor chosen fighting alongside. You can see one of the Nazgûl there as well, so they're now involved, which will give Mordor a good amount of quality. It's whether or not they have the cover around them, because this is pretty much the entirety now. There's still some units way back there, some Temple Guards, some Orc Javelins, ranged units. May as well throw them forward as well to try and get a little bit more support on the front line. Ultimately, Imladris will be taking damage because of the Troll's presence, the Nazgûl now as well. Those higher end units for Mordor can inflict damage on Imladris, and in a 5v3, any of that is going to be useful for you, but there can be no doubt that Mordor's losses have been absolutely horrendous over here. The Elven Archers have been one of the primary vectors for that. Javelins raining down from on high. Sauron's will arriving on the front line. Armor piercing will be welcome, and they won't be the easiest unit to rout off either. Chosen a little bit separated from the rest of the force, in fact. Still got plenty of those archers as well. Another unit of Norotino warriors firing in, targeting the Sauron's will by the look of it. A good choice. Once they're out of ammo, of course, can also be a real threat. Going after the Ardenheim shadow bows in behind. Allowing the attacking rangers across the entire field so far to gain any sort of traction. Javelin's now going after the God Halim, which is a pretty good choice of target, you'd have to say. Trolls starting to lose ground now as well. As soon as the Nazgûl get isolated as well, that's where, stats or no stats, they will be dealt with. Now then, Rhaen's Mordor army now also testing the waters, this time against the Dwarves, combination of the 2nd and 3rd Legion. 2nd Legion's armor-piercing axes will make quick work of the Uruk infantry, you would suggest. And it's going to be a matter of which side can win through in what is going to be a war of attrition by the looks of it. Will it be quantity or quality? 4th Legion adding themselves in as well. Solid defensively. Not yet moving across this bridge. Morgul Chosen thinking about it though. Some runic units also going to be assisting Commander's force as he moves across. Over here, maybe slightly less horrifying for the attackers, but Lindon have still been doing the business in melee, and this is the sort of engagement where Lindon can really be dominant when there's not really a huge amount of range pressure. They are trying to hit Lindon, but the angle isn't really in the attacker's favours for that. So when it comes down to pure melee fighting from the front, all of that melee defence is what Mordor and Rhun are going to have to deal with. And Rhun, as we've already mentioned, are not really ideally placed for dealing with Lindon because of their armor-piercing slant. More arrows raining in. Hellbirds. Now getting targeted by the Lindar. He's wearing crossbows as well. I don't know if they necessarily have the best of angles either. But being on horseback means they are slightly higher up. Maybe that will be to their great benefit. We'll have to wait and see. So it's trading ranged fire, but it's not quite as decisive as what Imladris were doing over here, although... What's going on now? Have they decided to retreat? Indeed they have. So this is probably going to be a coordinated move across the field. They probably could have stayed here and defeated Mordor completely, but Maybe they're deciding to just cut their losses now. Interesting. Don't know where the Nazgul have gone. They don't like I live. 4 of them only, but Swords of Rivendell acting as the rear guard, facing off against Mordor Chosen and Sauron's Will. Although, this is where the Gwythy Rockdoor can really start to clean up. They need to be a little bit wary of the fact that they're charging into spears, but as long as they cycle back out quickly enough, that shouldn't be too much of a problem. Very surprised if these units don't rout off either. So are they? I mean, the problem is now, Mordor's force over there doesn't really have the numbers to be able to start the domino effect on the outer ring, if that's what they wanted to do. Dwarves are still very much committed to these front lines over here, although what I will say is the attackers over here are now committing more units forward, so retreating is going to be a little bit more of a difficult task if that's what they wanted to do. I'm a little bit surprised that that's what Imladris have done, to be honest, at this point in time. There would have been a moment to retreat, but maybe jumping the gun just a little bit? I don't know, I'll have to wait and see. Heroic infantry defeat seems certain. Only a military genius could win this battle. Indeed, a military genius would probably say that you need a little bit more on the front line to make something happen. Melkor's Abominations could do with trying to get into the inner ring of the defence. Or outer ring, I guess. Try and help out against those Gwythy Rockdoor, but in order to do that you need to try and affect some sort of forward movement against the units that are already fighting over here. And that is easier said than done given the nature of what Khazad-Dum's infantry is capable of. We shall see. The horn blares out once more. I suppose giving room for the cavalry has given its own reward here, albeit both sides, weirdly enough, retreating from one another here. I mean, this is the sum total now of Mordor's army over here. It's very battered and bruised. So they are going to now be forced to engage in the slower paced tactics, allowing their allies a little bit more to try and make something happen. Imladris manning the interior of the settlement, so there will be units that will be here to defend should the worst happen on the outer bridges. As is custom for a battle like this, the frames do struggle when you've got this many units all together in one big blob. Lindon's javelins doing the business now. Combination of Merc crossbows and the Lindon Mariners. Good hits being scored. Cowbirds ready to move forward as well. In order to get through here, could you argue the Beasts of Gorgoroth would be the ideal choice? And if they could live long enough to actually get through all of the anti-cavalry stuff that is here. Which does also apply to elephants. Elephant-class units, I suppose, would be a better way of putting that. Looks like the Mariners are out of ammunition, so they will now simply be light spears in melee. Noldor and Blademast have been committed, so Lindon definitely not interested in backing down from this fight just yet. They're committing more and more infantry. Definitely fancying their chances against the men in gold. It is a poor matchup for Rhun in general. All of the units which are usually so efficient for them, not so much here. And back over to the front. Getting involved in this kind of fight probably isn't the best for the Lindon Mariners. Trying to get a good shot into the side of the attacking infantry, but as a result, taking all sorts of arrow fire from the other side. Needing to push through just past the bridge. The problem is I don't know if the Orcs are going to be able to maintain this. They are still taking that javelin fire. And there's also the small matter of the axemen that have gone forth to meet them. Certainly in terms of the skirmish fight over here, though, it's not gone particularly well for the defenders. Wards of Elostirion have been cleaned up very nicely by basic Mordor archers. Maybe one of the first instances of that sort of fight going in favour of the attackers that we've seen in this battle so far. Orcs Hunters of Khazad-Dum also suffering a similar sort of fate. Heroic archers here in bulk, but it does also mean that the dwarven infantry is being left completely alone. They are having to go up against dwarf maulers with their armour piercing and melee, but the difference in quality is still pretty damn vast. Heroic archers just in behind as well. Those abominations lurking. Gundabad. Come forwards and be safe in the knowledge that they won't rout. Still, no forward movement here just yet. God Helene laying on the welcome party should they decide that they wish to move forwards. A little bit more infantry perhaps required by Rhun if he is to keep up the pressure on the dwarves, who are continually moving forwards. A little bit dicey over here for a moment, but the quality, the reinforcements and the javelin support have forced Mordor back onto the back foot once again. Look now, Rhun.
Defeat seems almost certain.
Still trying to get a good shot off. I mean, again, where there are Lindon forces, you can always be sure that your arrows are going to be pretty effective if you can get them in there. There's also some Imladris forces here as well, so all three of the defenders have a stake in defending this particular bridge now. Victory still seems certain. So far the quality has seen them through, but little instances of some units falling away. Units fleeing way in the background over there. You can see where the river would flow. And then back over here. Some forward momentum gained by the attackers once again. And it's been a rough day at the office for Rhun as well. Admittedly, their armour piercing won't be completely put to waste against the NOLDOR, but there you still have that big gulf in terms of quality. Seems to be less density of projectiles now as well, just the occasional stray arrow that both sides are sending the other way. Going to commit those high mass units. Do you think there's a shelf life on the attacker armies here? They can't afford to simply send units to die into the meat grinder limitlessly. Other unit of Warns of Alos Tyrion, who have been effectively targeted down, you have to say, by the attackers, so certain targets have been met. NOLDOR and Blade Masters joining the back of the queue once again. And there is that forward push, and again that lightweight nature of Lindon can be a concern in these situations, but the sheer damage that the attackers will be taking while doing this at the hand of those Lindon swords is going to be big. Elsewhere, Norretirno warriors. Elder Enway. Another unit of Warns of Alos Tyrion. Certainly a big investment in their rangers, Lindon. In a decent position as well to do some damage, especially to the unshielded forces that are being committed forward now. And one over here. As they push forwards, that has actually put them into range of some of the units on the other side of the riverbank. Guard of Barad-dûr now moving forward, but you need a force of infantry to take advantage of the yardage that they will make. They have got Sauron's Will moving forward and a unit of Orc Maulers. Is that going to be enough? Especially when you consider they're going to be taking horrendous damage, especially at the hands of something like the 2nd Legion. No, Khazad-Dum Reclaimers in position as well. Face full of throwing axes if they do manage to make it all the way through these lines. Still looping in. Ballooning their shots pretty high, but most of those will hit something. I don't know if this Mordor push is going to result in anything positive for them. the side as well for another unit of Lindar bowmen. So far all of the attackers have really suffered. When they've brought their units forward, they've taken horrendous losses and not really had a whole lot to show for it at the end. The only thing that this might result in is the defenders' numbers eventually collapsing before yours do, which is entirely possible, entirely likely in a 5v3 even. Still a few more of those. Perhaps the healthiest single Mordor army is this one now. Reigns has more left in reserve than anyone else's. Heroic infantry being kept in place by the troll drummers. Unfortunately, however, the hammers of Gundabad need no extra encouragement. They will stay here to the bitter end. And that arm-piercing damage will be far too much for the likes of regular Uruks. Drummers don't want to get into melee, really. I think he wants to attack, but then he goes back to hammering away on his drum. Uruk archers taking a few hits from those orc hunters, but that's really a bit of a footnote. Keep one eye on that one. Cavalry making its way across. Are they the Golden Raiders? And these seem like desperate measures. If the Black Guard didn't manage to force its way through with mass, are they trying to do the same with their mounted crossbowmen now? Entirely possible, but also far too much in the way of anti-cavalry over here for this to be effective. The Golden Raiders don't have the best stats up close either, so that will only hasten their demise. Axe is still raining down as well. Not the most effective firing angle, but like I said, all of those really are resulting in hits. Spears for Rivendell. Seems certain still for the defenders. More units arriving across now, but again, it's the gap between these is the problem. If this has been a continuous conveyor belt of units being fed in, this defensive position may have been overrun by now. But because of the gaps, it has allowed that quality to really take hold. But Khazad-Dum reclaimers now getting involved in the melee battle as well. Damage added to the front line. Now this is a moment. Is this going to be where things turn around? I mean, Rhun have done quite well to force Lindon back as far as they have, but they are now literally on their last legs and they would lose without assistance. Horse Lords of Ulmo taking hits from those javelins. The real question is whether or not these guys can keep themselves alive as they pass through what will be a fair amount of anti-cavalry. Beasts of Gorgoroth don't have quite the same survivability level as something like the Mumakil. As they roll forwards. They have managed to break out into the open field. This could be the moment they've been waiting for. They need the reinforcements to arrive more quickly. Again, bridges are difficult to navigate, so I do have some sympathy for the attackers in that regard, but I need to try and compensate for this sort of thing. I think maybe this is the first significant development in favour of the attackers that we've seen so far. They were going to try and get through with the Malcolm's Abominations as well, but the infantry has closed back over. The thing is, now they've got to deal with these monstrous units in behind enemy lines. Javelins flying back and forth. Hunter and Blade Master. There's a good amount of Lindon's strength still on this front line as well, so this could be a real turning point in the battle. The benefit of Elephant class units when they move forward like that, even against a thick, well-prepared defence, they're still going to be able to make ground because of their sheer size and mass. The main issue can be how long they last. You can see here Horse Lords of Ulmo and the Gwythi Rockdor, two of the finest units of Elven cavalry that there are, charging in to try and buy a little bit of time for some of those Lindon elites to get back within the walls. Will they be successful in that regard? The cavalry itself is being hunted down. This is also where the Beasts of Gorgoroth with their javelins as their ranged unit will come in very handy. Of course, Abominations are here as well though, so yes, Big moment this for the attackers. They finally managed to force their way through the bridge defences, and they will be able to set their sights on the settlement itself. Those abominations still looming large. Over yonder, still holding on quite nicely on the front here. You can see over there though, Rhaen's army now activating with more strength, Blackguard of Barad-dûr and Olag High, and over here there's less numbers to be able to counteract that. So this might be the second bridge that the attackers are able to force their way across. Olag High moving fairly slowly, you'd have to say. Orc hunters of Khazad-Dum. Loosing a few arrows there. Really marching forward with any sort of gusto here, but I guess I don't really need to. The Olag High, admittedly against many armor-piercing shock troops. There goes the Lindon general, who did not manage to get away from this mosh pit that Mordor and Rhun have created. Arrows from the walls now being utilised. Those runway archers trying to take some pot shots at these forces. I mean, it's not a limitless army that they have left now, Mordor, and I don't know how useful the Beasts of Gorgoroth and Malkor's abominations are going to be moving forwards. Cummel's chosen in there, of course, but still, the fact of the matter is that they have managed to get through here, and they were able to inflict some pretty serious wounds on Lindon as they did so. In order for their next phase of the battle to truly begin, however, they need to try and find their way across these two bridges at the front. Less likely over here, more likely over here. There's the Olag High, like I was saying. Hammers of Gundabad and 2nd Legion, both fairly effective against trolls, maybe not in the kind of numbers that they're currently in, having already been involved in combat for quite some time. That is the silver lining to this cloud for the dwarves. They should be able to do decent damage to the trolls, which should positively impact their chances later on. A lot of heavy axemen here for the orcs though. Well suited for the task at hand. You can also see where the river would be, so you can't actually support your attacks on the other side, otherwise I'm sure the Beasts of Gorgoroth would have helped attack from the bridges on the front. Google still waiting, still biding time. Defending cavalry still over here. Not wanting to try and take on the Malkor's abominations on the other side, simply keeping another army in check for now. Runway archers still firing their payloads, as are the runic archers now, leaving their fiery mark all over the walls. Yeah, the real question is going to be whether they have the infantry to still be competitive as the game goes along, because the defenders still have that quality they can fall back upon, and the attackers don't have really the numbers that they once did. And they're going to need to try and pressurise multiple angles, because if they go in one by one, which it feels like they've kind of done on the bridges, each one of them really committed forward in a full-blooded manner at different moments, and that gave the defenders a bit more breathing room.
They have lost half their men.
Surprised we're only now hearing the announcer start mentioning such things. Some Morgul chosen back there, another unit of Malkor's abominations, waiting for the moment where they can surge forward after this dwarven infantry has been dealt with. Elsewhere, how much does Commander still have left in the tank? Some Uruk Chieftains wouldn't go amiss in this situation, admittedly. Javelins, Temple Executioners as well, so still some quality. Again, much like I think Google's army, a little bit more of a footnote, going to have to be acting in maybe a supporting manner as the battle enters its latter stages. So we'll just have to wait and see. Over here, meanwhile, are they attacking already? Not waiting for their allies to gain any sort of momentum by the looks of things. Leading the way once again with the beasts. Yeah, they are going to defend, again, another bridge, actually. The bridge over to the near island. Main body of the settlement then going to be sacrificed, which is not that surprising given how front-loaded their defence was. I kind of thought they would defend the walls, but in the end they decided to defend the bridges. But there's only so many phases of a battle that you can have in this sort of situation and still be effective. Stop those javelins raining down. Eldarenway spearmen should be able to, yeah, and there they go, bringing down the beasts of Gorgoroth. But they were definitely a very decisive unit. If not for them, the attackers would probably still be stuck outside of the settlement, but at the very least they've got boots on the ground in it. Nazgul are here as well. Valos Tyrion, capable in melee. Nazgul's Abomination is probably not in the ideal situation for them. Enemies all about them. And those maces will still do the business, but there's only so many of them before they start to lose effectiveness. Good amount of bodyguard tier units here. Again, numbers may end up being the issue in an engagement like this. If the elves and dwarves can bottle you up on the bridge, as we've already seen, that can be a supremely effective tactic. How much in the way of ranged units they still have? Mercenary crossbowmen? They certainly carry a bit of a punch. The only defending humans on the field today are these guys. Firing their shots. Still a few defenders over here. Khazad-Dum reclaimers, no slouches in melee. Cavalry also making its presence felt. Managing to get a charge off into the Temple Guard, I should say. How much ammo they have could be really key, actually, because there's not really many places for the defenders to hide if they get caught in the crosshairs of something of that magnitude. Meanwhile, finally the defenders have buckled on one side, and the reinforcements from the Malkor's Abominations, meaning the commander's army is also relieved as well. They will finally be able to unite within the fortress, and it will be a one battle affair now. Everyone will be fighting in the same area. The Reclaimers refusing to go down without a fight. Like high on the way across as well, 14. All of them bloodied though. How much damage they took on the way forward is going to be very key, I think. Certainly for the Khazad-Dum Reclaimers. Flooding into the settlement. As I mentioned, the gates are actually fake in this settlement. It's a bit of a weird one, but they're effectively just choke points. Over here, more Khazad-Dum Reclaimers, as well as some Noratino warriors. I mean, they're good, but they're not so good that they can beat a combination of Temple Executioners and Kharmul's Chosen. But they are allowing a little bit more time for those ranged units to try and focus them down. This is very often the case in a 5v3. The attackers can lean very heavily on their numbers advantage very often. Dragon's Wrath crossbows are definitely not the sort of thing that the defenders would be wanting to see late on. Extremely dangerous unit. Blank fire, of course. Rockdor's still there. Noodle's army will be moving in as well. Some Temple Guard who do actually have ammunition left. We know that for a fact because they didn't ever advance with the main body of the army over here in the early stages. So that's going to be key. Lindon Bowmen moving forward. Sacrificial lamb to send them in against the Temple Guard, even if they are as depleted as it seems.
Seems almost certain.
Defeat all hunters of Khazad-Dum. Firing away, trying to do as much damage to those temple executioners as they can. The occasional one does fall as the orcs pour down the central reservation now. And our bowmen rout in the face of some of Mordor's scarier units, admittedly. There's still a fair way in this battle to go. How will it turn out? Use of what supporting units they have left is going to be key. Orc hunters, still a fair number of them. Very depleted Ruins of Alos Tyrion, but it means that they will be able to sustain arrow fire for quite a long time. Interesting that the Malkor's Abominations are the ones moving in first, especially seeing as the first line of defence are Elder Enway Spears. Ruins of Alos Tyrion, another depleted unit. Flaming Shot is an interesting choice. Interestingly, Mordor actually pulling back. A few more of the orcs fall as they do so. Small matter of some mounted units. I mean, mercenary crossbows are not that devastating that they will be able to cause too much trouble to the temple executioners, and that has definitely played out there. Trying to get a charge into the flag room, but the pathfinding didn't help Flame of Arnor there at all. Now forced to flee once more. What are they firing at? Wasted shots, whatever it is. Maybe going after the cav. The dangers of fire at will. The rest of the forces, other than Google's, pretty much within EREGION now. Stacking up. Throwing very insignificant amounts of units at one another for now. The attackers trying to plan out their next move a little bit more carefully, having suffered all of them in bridge battles before. I mean, just taking stock of what the elves and dwarves have left. The dwarves have got their most powerful units still available to them. I don't think that will be the case, at least not in full strength for the elves, just because we saw the Lindon bodyguards trying to flee. Not many of them made it. The elven ones were also involved from early on as well, so the Gwaithimyrdain a little bit depleted. The dwarves are going to be the centrepiece of the defence here, and I did notice them as well. The Iron Watch. In this sort of engagement, they can be devastating. It might be there that the defenders are going to be placing their hopes. They've got the quality to be able to hold the attackers at arm's length. The damage that the Iron Watch can chuck out, not dissimilar to the sort of effect that the Witchers can have on a battlefield. Especially a siege like this, morale might end up being the issue for the attackers. I think this is going to have to be a ×2 thing if this is what the next phase of the battle is going to be. I mean, definitely the right choice of target for the Rhun. First Legion pikes are really, really potent in these later stages because of how defensively adept they are. Still trading back and forth, not yet ready to commit to a full engagement, the attackers, and they may very well have seen the Iron Watch looking over here. If you get involved in a blob fight down here, it's going to be very, very ugly for you. So they're having to be a little bit more coy about what they're doing. Swords of Rivendell now getting involved, picking up the slack against Uruk archers. A combination of them and Elder Enway spearmen will easily be able to deal with the force that's arrayed before them. Rhun. Do they have any other ranged tools? They still have those Temple Guard. Whether or not I can get them into place to try and shoot at the Iron Watch, they should be able to, I think. If nothing else, you'd force the Iron Watch to respond to the Temple Guard rather than the main body of your army, which would be where they would be at their most deadly. I can understand the attacker's caution here, but ultimately there's one way in, one way out. Everything that's happened in the battle up to now has led to this being the situation, so I'm going to have to try and deal with that one way or another. Quality as well. Everything truly scary for the dwarves still remains. The elves on home turf are a little bit more battered and bruised. Still leading the way with these Rhun. Malcolm's abominations. Trudging slowly into what will ultimately be a doomed endeavour. I don't really know why they did that. Feeding kills to your opposition. And they could still have been useful. Here we go. This looks a little bit more promising. And it's Uruk Archers and Orc Maulers, so definitely not the last word in terms of quality. But forcing the Alderaan Spearmen forwards a little bit more. Piercing damage will certainly not be useless against the gold-clad elves, but they will still find themselves hideously outmatched unless they can get some sort of support in there. Nazgul, perhaps. Sauron's will would do the job. They also inspire nearby units, so these guys are less likely to rout, although I'm sure that will be in their future regardless. Still, what are they firing at? I see. Trying to utilise the fortifications to their advantage, the attackers. A classic idea, but it's not gone that well for them, you have to say. I mean, Ranger's a Ranger. Also, it looks as though the Ardenheim are trying to target other things down. As a result, they've been cleaned up quite nicely by the Lindon Rangers. Archers moving in, Orc Hunters. The Iron Watch still remains safe. The other units have borne the brunt of the attacking skirmishes so far. Sauron's will may have arrived as a significantly more worthy foe for the Alderaan, but still that gap in quality remains. I'm actually impressed that these orcs have remained in the fight as long as they have, to be honest. Out of ammunition now, the Walls of Elos Tyrion move forwards. And the Rhun trying to establish themselves as well. They've really got the range to be using javelins effectively. Too much of the reinforcements for the defenders are going to be just out of reach, and trying to hit these units is not impossible. You will do it, but you have to go over your own men to do it, so it's not quite as effective as it would otherwise be. Occasional fire arrow coming in from the Walls of Elos Tyrion. The worst idea because of the lower tier nature of many of these units, but in stark contrast to that, the Nazgul have now arrived. This does change the dynamic of this quite a bit. The Nazgul will be able to overcome any of the defending units that are here anyway. Maybe the Dwarven units being a full health could provide a significantly sterner test. Trying to attack in stages here. I mean, I think the attackers are doing the right things. If they do move forward with everything they have, they would push the elves back. Like I said, the risk is not really worth it because of the Dwarven Mortars. Still got some good units in defence as well. A couple of units of Imladris Guardians would be the next ones to reinforce this front line. This has been a battle entirely based around bridge combat, which is rather one note in terms of what it is, but also I think the main thing behind this battle is when the attackers have decided to commit units. Again, a little bit disjointed on the outer bridges between when each one of them decided to make their move, but ultimately it did result in the Beasts of Gorgoroth having that decisive moment where the attackers forced entry into the settlement. And then the defenders as well, reinforcing, choosing where to put their units, bulking up in the appropriate areas. Tyrion still looping a few shots. The Iron Watch have moved, presumably to try and get out of range. Rhun still taking the occasional pot shot at the Lindon Rangers. Nazgûl are on the front lines now. They are a slow burn kind of a unit. The damage that they do is over a longer period of time. Also trying, I mean, I don't really know, going after the Imladris Guardians, well armoured, well shielded from the front, especially with how depleted the Narim are, the chances of it resulting in kills are somewhat limited. Better off trying to continue to silence those other unit of Wardens of Elos Tyrion. Stock of what the attackers still have left. I mean, a unit of Temple Guard from, not Revios, but from Google is probably the one that I would look at as a very key factor. Commander still has a few deadly units as well, some good high tier stuff. Lobot with his runic forces as well. More than one unit of Nazgûl still remains, but the issue here, they do have a numbers advantage, but it's not really distinct anymore, so they are going to be reliant on stuff like their javelins, both the runic and the orcish ones, and their quality to be able to fight reasonably toe-to-toe with the defenders. The Nazgûl makes that certainly possible, even against the most potent of those dwarven infantry units that still remain, but I don't know. Now moving forward, the mercenary crossmen trying to get some crossfire into the orcish units that still are on the front line. Pulling back some of their units now as well. Seeing that as an opportunity to maybe try and force their way forward now, the attackers. Imladris Guardians shuffling their way across. All comes out of ammunition by the looks of things. Again, many of the units that they still have left, certainly as we get back here into some of the dwarven ones, are units of genuine quality, whether they're a ranged unit first or not. A lot of them are going to be really, really effective. There's also the Silverthorns that these God Hellions still do have, albeit their ammunition supply must be significantly lower as a result of being very active in the early stages of the battle as well. Mercenary crossbows not really too concerned about the hits they're taking, because again they're from reasonably depleted units. They've taken the Elder Runway Spearmen off the front line, but I think the Nazgûl were also retreated. Neither side is interested in taking the bull by the horns here, and the defenders shouldn't be. They're in a comfortable position. I think based on the tools they have left, I would probably favour them to actually go on to win this. The attackers, on the other hand, are going to have to get a little bit creative with what they have remaining. The Dragon's Wrath crossbows are another big tool that they can use if they can get their units into the appropriate positions. It's exactly the sort of thing which can turn a battle on its head. Shots coming in. Imladris Guardians. the longer that the battle goes on in the same fashion that it's going, the better it's going to be for the defenders, really, because while these victories that they're winning here are small, they do all add up, and it just makes the attackers' job just a little bit harder when they have less manpower to play with in the latter stages. We're going to start moving in with something a little bit more substantial now, maybe. There's certainly some serious looking units moving forward. Lord's Chosen, Temple Guard, the Black Guard of Barad-dûr here, depleted as they may be. They can still do their job with this amount of units in the Olag High as well, so yeah, this is going to be it, I think. This is going to be the decisive passage of play for the battle. It's exactly the sort of moment as well where we could see the Iron Watch do their thing. Olag High as well. Units onto the front line, but I mean this won't be enough to hold back the tide, but yeah, there they are. Iron Watch now starting to fire into the blob. Just need to hold them back long enough for them to do their thing. Olag High, however, are pretty likely to force their way through this position pretty quickly, so I don't know whether the defenders have actually got enough on the front line. You can see even trolls get sent flying though by the mortar bolts
Defeat seems almost certain.
that the Iron Watch have. Crossbows. Also with a bit of ammunition left to them. Yeah, they're forcing their way through here. I think the Olag High see the threat. They need to try and get their way through this defensive position as quickly as they possibly can. There is always the risk of friendly fire with a unit like that, but that is perhaps why they've undermanned this defence, so any hit that they take is not necessarily the most important thing in the world. The crossbows also doing their thing over here now as well. That's a bit of a double whammy in terms of damage that the attackers are going to be taking as they try and march through here. Even if they just get to the point, the defenders, where their high tier quality units at the back of the field can then see them over the line, they would take that. Away archers, final 10k frames now as well. Some spears of Rivendell trying to keep hold of this position for as long as they possibly can. I think the rate of fire on the Iron Watch is a little bit undercooked here. I think that's because they're just on the edge of their effective range, so only some of them are actually firing. It does keep them out of harm's way a little bit more, but still. The Godhalim also firing away. Silverthorn arrows going after the Balkoth tribesmen by the looks of things, trying to prevent any sort of attacking range support from making itself known. Eldarin Way archers very capable of looking after themselves in melee, albeit that was a little bit unfortunate for them. Plenty of friendly fire coming in from the Iron Watch, which is the flip side. If they're targeting the trolls, they really ought not to be. They should be targeting the very back of the attacking position, because then you're far less likely to hit your own men. Orc hunters also on their way in now. Blackguard managed to get in behind enemy lines, but with no further support. That will be the end of them in double quick time. Quality on the way across though, Temple Executioners and the Nazgul. A whole load of orcs. Defenders withstand? That is the question. And quality on the way down from the defenders as well. So it will be here. This is a little bit more like it. Now that they're in effective range, they can fire more quickly. The reload time is still pretty significant, but that was a lot of damage those Temple Executioners just took. And the defenders will be wanting to order more of that. Bulk up on the front line. The guards of Khazad-Dum with those armor-piercing attacks should be pretty good at trying to take down the remainder of the trolls, bloodied and bruised as they are. Watch still there. Dragon's Wrath crossbows are firing, but what's that? Do they have an angle? No, they do. Going after the First Legion pikes as well, that's a very good choice of target. Immediately, of course, this is going to elicit a response from the Silverthorns, and the problem is there, the Silverthorns, even if they don't kill the Dragon's Wrath crossbows quickly, they will still make it far more difficult for them to fire and reload. It's one of the main perks to having that kind of ammo type in the first place. The Gwaith-Arthand, who were involved early doors, once again being tasked with holding back the Horde. Also here. 9 of them in behind enemy lines, but separated a little bit from their support. There goes one of the Orc generals. The more of those that fall, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to cause a chain rout. God Helene getting involved in melee, ignoring the Nazgul, interestingly enough, which might be a little bit of a mistake if they manage to intercept the Iron Watch. I think that may have been another Orc general, so in quick succession there. The attackers losing a couple of generals. Player admitting defeat. The Iron Watch going after the Orc Javelins now because it's a safer target. Yeah, this defensive position now, unless they can get some sort of forward traction here, the attackers, I think they're going to end up getting caught on all of these units. The fact that the First Legion are at the core of this defence and you've got all of the quality in and around them as well, I think it's going to be too much to bear for them. Smelter Runway Swordmasters at full health also coming down, and then you've got the Mithril Guard as the backstop should you need it. That is everything for the defenders, so they are committing more or less all that they have remaining to them. There are the Temple Guard. They are shooting into the side of this defence. They just about have the range to do so. Could have the impact they need, and they need it too. That's pretty much their last hope. Another attacking general. That the runic one, I think. Don't think there's much left for Rhun anyway, but still. Javelins trying to do their thing. Some Barkov tribesmen are routing. Some crossmen obviously not very good on the charge in comparison to other cavalry units, but trying to chip in with some extra damage now, trying to go after the Temple Executioners that managed to get in behind enemy lines. The Nazgul are here, bravely going after the guards of Khazad-Dum, in fact. Yeah, those Temple Guard have actually got a good thing going here. Neither side will be too happy with the losses that they've taken as a result of that past passage of play, but I think still the defenders will be slightly more pleased than the opposition. And shadow bows moving in. What do they have in reserve?
From such tidings does victory emerge.
Nothing with any real steel to them, other than the Dragon's Wrath crossbows, and the announcer seems to concur. Mithril Guard trudging downhill as well. It's looking like the defenders may manage to hold on. That would make for 2 defender victories in a row. I'm sure that will make people very pleased indeed. Mithril Guard taking hits. Unsurprisingly, being one of the first choices of target. Guards of Khazad-Dum took a lot of damage there at the hands of those Temple Guard, and latterly the Nazgul, but still standing and still certainly healthy enough to do the business. The God Halim and the Gwaith-Arthand, I think that's the final attacking general. As I was saying, I think all of the Imladris bodyguards, well, the Gwaith-Arthand and the God Halim at least, they've been involved right from the opening stages of the battle. And they're still standing, still fighting. Goes to show the defensive prowess of the elves. Not a huge amount of Lindon left, you'd have to say, but then they were the ones who bore the brunt of the attackers' fury, really. At the Beasts of Gorgoroth and that mass push was, I think, the single most effective move the attackers made in this battle as a whole. Crossbows still alive. The Nazgul are still in behind enemy lines as well, but fresh Mithril Guard moving forwards will bring them down, you would think. Or javelins. A lot of these guys left, but that's pretty much the only thing other than those Temple Guardsmen who are on their way across now. And the Iron Watch taking more shots at the Orc Javelins. They may as well at this point pad that kill count out a bit. Some units still at the top of the hill actually. Still eyes that one unit of Elder Runway Swordmasters. The one unit they still have in reserve that is unactivated. Trying to lob those javelins over. Actually they do have a decent angle of fire there as a result of the Nazgul keeping them a little bit further back. Good damage. The Iron Watch still have any sort of ammunition, they should be utilising it really. Goes to show how resilient the Nazgul really are as well. There's only one of them left, but they've been fighting a hopeless fight in behind enemy lines for quite a while at this point, and still just about standing. The javelins continue to throw away. Iron Watch once again, firing in. Causing deep wounds on the Orcish units in behind. Yet committing that final unit of Elder Runway. It's been a bloody battle indeed. 2% the difference. I don't imagine that'll be changing too much between now and the end. The javelins will probably inflict sufficient damage to ensure that remains true. Throwing projectiles. There is the Nazgul, the one remaining Nazgul. Finally brought down by the Mithril Guard. And that means they will be able to then join the front line, and that will surely cease any remaining hope that the attackers would have had that they can maybe try and force their way in. Through the buildings though, Dragon's Wrath crossbows still doing their thing. The problem is as well, if they move back as they were trying to, that just gives the Iron Watch the excuse they need to loose another volley. Get into melee, give them a little bit more cover actually being on the bridge. And the final unit that has yet to be committed also now moving down. The Javelin's getting crushed by the mortars. Still good hits. We won't be able to see what damage they did actually, because we were viewing this battle from Lindon's perspective. So we'll be able to see what they did, but not what these other two have done. But ultimately kill counts are not really all that important anyway. It's how effective you are across the entirety of the field. Another player admitting defeat. Was that the Runic player? No. I was going to say, he still has, I mean, between the Temple Guard and the Dragon's Wrath crossbows, those are still two decent units, but it's going to take more than those two to be able to turn this around. Gammon shaken. Not routing though. A couple of troll drummers still live, but the two quote-unquote officer trolls, so they don't actually have the drums. Swordmasters. They were chasing the Orc Javelins, but they are going to be intercepted by the Black Numenorians. They don't have stats to go toe-to-toe, but they lack that second hit point of the Temple Guard. Fortunately, the Temple Guard lacked the third hit point of the Mithril Guard. Whitey Myrdain also in the backfield there. Did most of their hard work early on. Trying to use those crossbows. Other Runway Swordmasters still just chasing those orcs down. The Temple Guard will have to contend with units on their own level of the bodyguard tier. It's all a moot point at this point anyway. We know that the defenders are on the victory path. Temple Guard defeats these. There's still 59 of them. Fair number. Guards of Khazad-Dum far more depleted as a result of the damage they took at the hands of multiple armor-piercing projectile units, actually. Still some Nazgul as well. The Troll Drummer very quickly will be brought down by the Meteor Guard, although Dragon's Wrath crossbows will be hoping to get another volley off. One last spit in the eye. And they do indeed. A couple of the Meteor Guard do fall, but also the Gwathi Myrdain are chasing them down as well, so in much the same way as the Orc Javelins were trying to flee and kite the enemy over there, it didn't work. Again, it's going to be not really possible for you to do that in this sort of situation. And the Runway Sword Masters defeat a distinct possibility. As a result of being involved with the Temple Guard, but you know, there must have been a defending general that died on the bridge earlier, at least one of them must have been. I assume based on the units that were present on the front line at the time, it may very well have been the Imladris one, actually. I'm sure the God Helene would have been where he was. It's hard to tell. Like Balin, if he is in the Meteor Guard, he blends in very, very well. If he was part of the Guards of Khazad-Dum, however, it may very well have been the Dwarven one. Unless we actually bump into one of the defending generals. Oh no, hang on. That there is the Imladris general, I think. So yeah, it must have been the Dwarven general. He perished earlier. God Helene. Bringing down the Nazgul. Dried out rivers meant they couldn't be washed away, as is tradition, but the old-fashioned way will have to suffice this time around. The Temple Guard. Them routing is a pretty rare sight. Of course, the Nazgul do not rout. They will fight to the bitter end, or they singular. Interestingly enough as well, we've got the Gwathi Myrdain, who chased down the Dragon's Wrath crossbows, introducing them to the hammers of the Smiths of EREGION, very much fighting on home turf they are. Players admitting defeat now. The Runic player, the last one standing. But not for too much longer. It's possible for these guys to rout, but they haven't done so yet. Don't know whether they will rout or whether they will be killed to the last man. No, they're wavering, they're going to flee. And there they go. A battle very much based around the bridges that this map offers. And the defenders made very good use of them. Like I said, I think the attackers, if they were to do anything differently, it would be to join their efforts up a little bit more. Try and attack over the bridges at the same sort of time. If one of them was going to delay, it should have been Google. And he was the one who went in first. So that's the order of events, I think, is the main thing that the attackers could have done differently. And then they would have had more left in reserve late on. And that would have been the difference, I think, given that it was around the 2% mark that this battle ended at. You know, and you did see ultimately the results of what can happen when a defending force is crushed under that sort of mass pushing capability. When Lindon folded, ultimately maybe even the first army to be completely destroyed. Google's was the first one to really have its wings clipped, but yeah, and actually getting more kills than Imladris, which is I guess Imladris did most of their damage early on. Later on, they were far more of a defensive bastion to really facilitate the dwarven damage. The dwarves were active throughout the entire battle as well, and obviously late on, a huge amount of damage would have been done by them as a result of their high-tier infantry and their ranged support. See what did the damage for Lindon then. Noldor and Blade Masters did reasonably well. The background for this is always a little bit, makes it really hard to actually read what the situation is, but Noldor Guard did fantastically, again getting up close with those orcs and those Easterlings. They were in their element really in a narrow engagement that's more defensively minded. Mithlon Pikemen did very well also, not too surprising. The bowmen were more effective than the javelins, but the javelins, I think in that outer engagement it was a little bit harder for them to get that crossfire set up than it was in other parts of the battlefield, so again less effective, but it's not too much of a problem. Mithlon Marines 317, that's a result of them having javelins and good melee skills. And then Noldor and Blade Masters 212, that's decent as well, another unit of Noldor and Guard. One's Velocitarian, pretty mixed, one of them very low, one of them 214 is acceptable, 192 again, pretty decent. So yeah, a mixed offering. Anything that gets below 100 is a little bit of a shame, anything that gets above 250 is a big performance really. So, big thank you to Colonel Speaks for sending this one in, big thank you to all the players as well for being a part of this battle replay. As regards to what's going to be coming out next, I think it is actually another one from the Flame of Arnor, which showcases an updated version of the map Moria, so that should be an interesting one to see. That one's quite an old one, but I wanted to show a couple of others off first before I did that one, and now we'll move on to it. And going further forwards, there's a few in the backlog now. I've kind of fallen behind a little bit, but we'll see what sort of order to do things in. And then of course we've got the faction overviews, which will be continuing as they have done for the past few weeks. So yeah, big thanks to all the players once again. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.